When I drink this mate, I introduce things to my body that damage or block the repair of my cell's DNA. It doesn't hurt once, but if I kept drinking it like this for years, the chance of one of these damaged cells starting to malfunction, to divide and grow out of control and eventually kill me, becomes a significant number. This mate, however, is as stimulating and probably even more delicious than the other one, but not only it has zero effects that today's science considers carcinogenic or cancer-causing, it's also a potent anti-cancer agent. So what is the difference? And how can you make your mate like the second one? First and foremost, the water temperature. Now, if there's a conversation anywhere about the potential health concerns of mate, this is always the number one thing coming up. Why? Because simply when a liquid so hot enters your mouth, it kills the top cell layer immediately. That's why you get that burnt mouth feeling. And the way your body reacts to that is trying to recreate those cells quickly. And when your body is forced to create new cells quickly, there is a bigger chance of it making errors in creating those new cells' DNA. And if they come up with mutations that cause them to divide too much, that's basically already called cancer. So how big of a threat is the traditional mate we drink from this standpoint? Actually, it's quite big of a threat. The World Health Organization lists drinks above 65 degrees Celsius as probably carcinogenic for humans, and there is a ton of research supporting that drinking mate very hot is indeed causing esophageal cancer. One study from Uruguay, for example, has showed 3 times higher chance of getting esophageal cancer for people who drink mate on very hot temperatures compared to those who don't even drink mate at all. Also, about half of all esophageal cancer cases should to be related to mate consumption also in Uruguay. It's also important to note here that studies shown that people who drank coffee or tea in similar high temperatures has gained about the same risks for esophageal cancer, so that likely has nothing to do with the specific molecules in mate, it mostly has to do with the heat stress that the water is delivering to your tissues. While the solution to all of this is quite straightforward, just take your mate temperature down to 65 degrees Celsius. I mean, I wish it was so easy. So the reason why I recommend 70 degrees Celsius for every mate drinker, because simply that's the temperature where most types of yerbas taste the best. If I'm being completely honest, I think every type of yerba can be enjoyable at 65 degrees Celsius, and if you kept drinking them on that temperature for a while, you will get used to it and you will get to love it. I'm pretty sure about that. But if you want yerbas for yourself that just taste the best at 65 degrees Celsius, I recommend you unsmoked yerbas, suave yerbas, especially Argentinian type suave yerbas, and also Cimarron. It also comes to mind that why don't you just switch to tereré and drink mate with cold water all the time? Well, in fact, it is the safest way in terms of esophageal cancer prevention. I mean, there is a 0% chance of getting esophageal cancer from drinking tereré, but tereré also extracts a little less antioxidants, so the overall anti-cancer properties of tereré are lower than that of an unsmoked hot mate drank at 65 degrees Celsius. And if you're thinking maybe you should still keep your current habits, let me warn you of some things. So the number one important thing is that if it burns your mouth, it is killing cells real time. Whatever burns your mouth, don't do that. Another important thing is that maybe at one point a certain temperature, for example 80 degrees Celsius, used to burn your mouth frequently, but you sort of got used to it. Well, based on studies, the fact that you no longer feel the pain from those heat exposures doesn't mean that the cell layers are not damaged anymore. So no matter how hot a mate you like and you endure for yourself, it's probably a good idea to start to little by little decrease the temperature until you go at least to 70 degrees Celsius, but really ideally below 65 degrees Celsius. Also, a real important risk that I want to point out here is that when you drink mate and smoke, the risk doesn't just add up, it multiplies, because the heat that sort of breaks open the tissue in your mouth, now that allows for the bad cancer-causing compounds of the tobacco to actually enter those damaged cells, and some ugly things happen there. But it's really important that if you smoke and drink mate, try not to do them in the same time. Speaking of smoking, let's talk about the second big group of risks related to mate, and those are barbacoa or smoked yerbas. Now, the way these are prepared is that the fresh leaves are placed on top of a campfire and basically smoked by wood smoke for a few hours. During this time, many compounds in the leaves are oxidated and become so-called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Now, these are dangerous molecules that are consistently listed as being carcinogenic for humans and are among the main harmful molecules found in tobacco, car exhaust, or charred meats. Now, you can think of these as basically the opposite of antioxidants. So when these polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons enter your bloodstream, they just hit the first thing they can catch. It can be, I don't know, a protein, can be any substance, but more importantly, it can be DNA. And again, when it comes to DNA getting damaged, that's what leads to cancer. It's hard to tell actually how much of these PAHs is actually absorbed into our bloodstream, but it can be in the range of several cigarettes for a full mate made of barbacoa yerba. Now, if you drink mate, you probably pay attention to your health to a degree, and if you were asked, would you smoke several cigarettes a day, you will most likely not want to do that. So for you to not do it even accidentally by drinking any kind of yerba that happens to be smoked, let's go through each type of yerba real quick and clarify which is smoked and which isn't. So you have those that are clearly labeled as barbacoa, meaning directly smoked, or sin humo, meaning free of smoke. Now, if a yerba is labeled one of these, it's surely that. But many yerbas that are smoked are not labeled as barbacoa, and many yerbas that are unsmoked are not labeled as sin humo. A good example for that is the chaotic world of Argentinian yerbas, where even among the most popular brands you have a huge variety. For example, Cruz de Malta, smoked. Tarahui, smoked. Playadito, now that one's unsmoked. You also have these Argentinian yerbas like Kraus that market themselves as being unsmoked, and they truly are. But whenever you buy an Argentinian yerba, you should always read the description. So next up are Uruguayan yerbas. Now these are kind of catchy because they don't feel really smoked, but as far as I know, all of them are prepared using the barbacoa method. Just after it, they are aged for a while, and they sort of smooth out the edgy, smoky flavors. But despite that, they do contain PAHs, which means they are somewhat risky for your health. Paraguayan yerbas are heavily smoked, no doubt about that. You take a sip and you feel like drinking a campfire. Clearly high PAH content in those ones. You also have Chimarrón, which is like bright green. It has zero smoke, although there are some brands that contain a little bit of smoking. I'm not suspecting any high amount of PAHs in those ones, so you can go easily with those Chimarróns. So when you're thinking about how to overcome the risk of PAHs or smoked yerbas, well, the easy answer is just drink only unsmoked yerbas. But if you're like me and you really love your Canarias and you don't feel like the risks are high enough for you to drop it from your cycle, I still recommend you to not drink Canarias every day. And when you drink it, it's really important to not drink it with hot water, because PAHs are similar to the PAHs in tobacco. When your esophageal tissue is damaged by the hot water, those compounds are entering those cells more easily, causing even more damage. So even if you stick with your Canarias, I recommend you to try to lower the temperature below 70 degrees Celsius and eventually end up on a safe 65 degrees Celsius for the rest of your life. I also think that keeping Uruguayan yerbas in your cycle is kind of worth it for an anti-cancer reason as well, because if you eliminate the high esophageal stress caused by the hot water and you only get in the PAHs, now that problem is somewhat more solved because Uruguayan style yerbas are packed with antioxidants. They make a super potent infusion that is full of cancer fighting compounds. Now some of that will be used up to fight the very PAHs that are already in the yerba because of the smoking, but the other part of them, which is still a huge healthy amount of antioxidants, will enter your bloodstream. You will be able to use them up. So yeah, I think that Uruguayan yerbas with colder water still have potential. But it's also important to note that if you're drinking Chimarrón or you find yourself an unsmoked Uruguayan yerba, you are dropping PAHs from the picture but get the same amount of antioxidants. So in the end, from a purely health perspective, Uruguayan yerbas are droppable from the picture, but they give you flavors and effects that are just one of a kind. So from here, you can just decide for yourself how much those risks matter for you. Next up is the confusing and complicated question of caffeine in yerba mate, which does have its risks, but not even for the reason why people think it has them. So let me explain. When you're asked what might be the problem with the caffeine in mate, you might say something like it has to do with heart disease. Well, actually no, the caffeine in mate is shown to have beneficial effects on the cardiovascular system. Or maybe you say, when you overdose on caffeine, that must be some very harmful situation. While in reality, when you drink too much mate and you feel a bad headache, that does not have to do with being intoxicated by the molecule caffeine itself. It has more to do with the effects of caffeine that contract the muscles of the neck, that pull the cranial fascia backwards, which causes a tension headache. The real problems with caffeine in mate dive deeper than that. They're more like system level errors. The first of these is dehydration. When you consume caffeine, your water metabolism simply accelerates, which means that you will urinate more, meaning more water leaves your system than normally does. And if you don't compensate for that with drinking plainly more water when you drink mate, you enter a state of dehydration, which is basically detrimental for every organ in your body, which all operate in water-based mechanisms. It impairs cognitive function, it impairs well-being, it causes headache, and if you're chronically in a dehydrated state, it's just a matter of time for one of your organs to start failing and from cancer to start growing somewhere in your body. So it's a real important thing, and I even recommend drinking 4 times as much water as the amount of mate you drink. For me, it means I drink about a liter of mate every day, and I drink at least 4 liters of water every day. Now, I have a big body, I have a big volume. For you, it might be less, but if you have a smaller body, you should probably not even drink a liter of mate in a day. So yeah, it's really important to keep this ratio and also to drink water in between your mate refills. The other problem with caffeine in mate is probably the most menacing one on this list, because it seems, based on the studies, that if you drink mate, you can't really overcome it. It has to do with the slow breakdown, the so-called long half-life of caffeine in your body. Now, in order to understand this, let's go through real quickly how caffeine even works in the first place. So caffeine is a molecule that is found in plants that happens to be able to interact with our brain's so-called adenosine receptors, which are receptors that are normally responsible to sense the presence of compounds that come to be when our neurons, our nerve cells, are constantly working. Which means that if our brain works for a long time, there will be more adenosine, more of this molecule, and our adenosine receptors will feel that there's a lot of adenosine, which means that our brains have been working for a long time, and that results in the feeling of sleepiness. Now, what caffeine does is straight up going to those adenosine receptors and just blocking them. So despite the adenosine is there, and you're supposed to feel tired, you just don't feel tired because the adenosine receptors are constantly occupied by the caffeine molecules. Now, the caffeine that is there in your adenosine receptors and basically everywhere in your bloodstream is degrading in your body. It's not stable there. It breaks down after a while. Now, that time exceeds even 8 hours, which means that if you drink a mate at noon, there is still caffeine in your system by the time you go to sleep. And the studies that show this data were done on the caffeine that is found in coffee, whereas in mate, the caffeine is known for being absorbed more slowly, a more balanced kind of effect that lasts longer. While we don't perfectly know how long does it take for the caffeine in mate to actually completely break down in your system, it is likely more than a day, which means that if you drink mate every day, there will be basically no time when there is zero caffeine in your bloodstream, which despite how small amount it is, still causes disruptions, especially in the sleep states that you need the most. Deep sleep, REM sleep, those are all somewhat made worse by even a small amount of caffeine that is present in your system after drinking a mate. When I got to know this, I didn't really know what to do with it. I mean, I don't feel like my sleep quality is particularly impaired by drinking mate, but maybe it could be much better if I didn't drink it, or maybe mate has some other compounds that we didn't really study yet. I for sure don't know what exactly happens when you drink mate and try to sleep well, and probably science doesn't even know that. So this is an area where study needs to be done, and you will surely see a separate Mateverse video solely on that topic. And for now, a conclusion I can come up with is to just try to place your mate as early in the day as possible, because the impaired sleep is really serious when it comes to health benefits. Like, sleep is the ultimate place where your body fixes itself. It is more important than anything you do while you're awake. And yeah, the sleep is not something mate should mess with. So now I don't really know the implications of this, but what is for sure is that you better try to place your mate as early in the day as possible. And based on my experience of being unable to fall asleep after drinking mate after a certain time point, that time point for me is 4 in the afternoon, but you should definitely stop drinking mate much earlier than that. So yeah, I'll be coming back with that topic and explain that in more detail in the future. Another important thing is that there is something you can actually do about this constant low level caffeine in your bloodstream, and that is to skip a day. At least one day a week should be a detoxification day where you drink no mate at all. And if I were you, I would keep several days for drinking only tereré, which has significantly less caffeine extracted because of the cold water. So if I were to make a weekly mate routine for the best health optimization, I would save at least one day for complete detox and at least 2 days for drinking only tereré, where you intake way less caffeine. And this is not only beneficial from solely a sleep science perspective. So when your overall caffeine tolerance is slightly lower, then you can really make use of a big dose when you actually need it. So, before big performances, before big times of focus. I mean, I don't usually recommend drinking excess amounts of caffeine before a place of extreme focus, but some people like to do that. So for them, it might be advisable to keep your general caffeine tolerance lower. So when you actually need to mobilize those resources, you can do that. Our last topic is the less talked about and probably the shadiest and the scariest in the same time. It has to do with certain life forms accumulating somewhere in your mate gear and causing serious problems to your health. What I'm talking about is mold and bacterial growth. Now, these can happen in two places: in a gourd that is not dried properly, or inside the bombilla that was not deep cleaned. Now, if you see green stuff in your bombilla, I mean, in most cases you don't even see it, otherwise you would clean it more frequently. That green stuff is residues from the yerba with mold and bacteria growing in it. Disgusting thing. The other red flag you should look for is white fuzz appearing in the bottom or on the side or under the lids of your gourd. If you only have green staining, it's perfectly fine. It's just the tannins of the mate oxidating the material of the gourd. But if you see white fuzz, that is mold. And the problem with mold is that it has a metabolism. What it means is that it produces basically poop, what we call mycotoxins. And if you intake them constantly, they are super detrimental for your health. They have shown scientifically to cause liver cancer, and they just cause all sorts of chronic diseases inside you without even noticing it. Some people develop a constant coughing because the mycotoxins damage their lungs. I mean, it's ugly. You should definitely pay huge attention to not have mold in your gourds, which means that you should dry it properly, ideally through flowing air in a well-ventilated place and somewhere that is really dry. But if you still see white fuzzy mold growing inside your gourd, you should drench the whole thing in hot water, maybe not boiling, at about 90 degrees Celsius. And you can also put baking soda in the water for a thorough cleaning. If that doesn't work, after a few cases, you should better throw away the gourd, because then the mold has integrated itself into the deeper layers of the gourd and it will be there forever. So you should definitely throw that away. The other thing you should do is deep cleaning your bombillas every month, which I had forgotten to do for a few months now, so I will definitely do it tomorrow. Which means taking all your bombillas, if some of them has removable heads, remove them and place all of them in a frying pan, cover them in water and add a few tablespoons of baking soda into the water and boil the whole thing for like 15 minutes. And then you should see the water turning menacingly green. Now that's what you should not have drunk. But after taking your bombillas out and you rinse them, it's already safe to drink from them again. Another sneaky potential risk that people don't realize is that if you buy some cheap alpaca bombillas or gourds, it is said that some of them use lead soldering, which if it gets to your bloodstream, it gets to your brain, and even a real little amount of lead intoxication causes long-term brain damage, neurodegenerative disorders. And if it's already in your blood, in your system, it's really difficult to take it out. So I would say just get stainless steel gourds and stainless steel bombillas. Those are totally safe. But if you want yourself some alpaca ones, I recommend you to not go for the cheapest ones, and especially not go for like little shops or used products. Well, today it's most likely hard to find a bombilla that is actually soldered with lead-based solders, but you should still get your mate gear from only reputable sources. So now let's summarize the cancer risks of yerba mate. Now the big one is still esophageal cancer. When you drink mate at 80 or 90 degrees Celsius, that is a big deal. You should definitely not do that. It has high risks. The other things, the PAHs and drinking mate at 70 degrees Celsius and all the other ones, I would say if you have a choice, you should definitely follow all of these. Because as I said, mate at 65 degrees Celsius from unsmoked yerba is perfectly enjoyable. It is as good as another kind of mate. So why don't you just choose that one for the best possible health effects? And with all that said, it's really important to keep in mind that no matter the temperature, no matter the smokiness, all forms of yerba mate contain a huge load of antioxidants. And in fact, even the smokiest, hottest yerba mates will decrease the risk of getting cancer in all parts of your body, except your esophagus. So again, that is the thing that you should really pay attention to, but otherwise mate is a super healthy drink that you should definitely drink if you want to extend your lifespan and your health span. So to completely wrap up this video, now let's make a daily mate routine that is the most anti-cancer and the healthiest possible. So you wake up at say 6 AM and at 7:30 you make your mate strictly from unsmoked yerba. You can go for aged yerbas if you want a more authentic taste, and you can go for shimaraon and completely raw green yerbas if you want the greatest amount of antioxidants delivered to you. You place a yerba in a gourd that's about 200 milliliters capacity, and that's made of completely dried out gourd or palo santo or some other inorganic material. Then you do your first steeping with room temperature water and attach your stainless steel bombilla. Then place 65 degrees Celsius water into your thermos and keep refilling your mate only with that water for the rest of the morning. Because you stop drinking mate at about noon, and for the whole afternoon you're just waiting for the caffeine to slowly disappear from your system, so you will have your perfect sleep. This kind of places your productivity window to the morning, and I think it's perfectly fine to do it that way. It's also important that every week you save some days for complete caffeine detoxification and some days for drinking only tereré. So as I said before, generally mate is a great tool against cancer, but it has its risks. But if you follow the routine I just laid down for you, you will basically minimize those and the risks will be negligible, and you will get the greatest possible health benefits from your mate. And if you're like me, you probably heard several things in this video that don't fall into the set of things that you do while drinking mate. And I think it's really important to be open about the risks we are taking, about the kind of unhealthy things that we do while drinking this healthy drink. So for that reason, I'll be sharing every piece of unhealthy mate habit I have in the comments, and I invite you to do the same thing, because a little openness might guide some people to drinking mate the better way, and it's just fun to see what other people are doing with their mate. So again, write it down in the comments, and thanks for watching, and see you in a different Mateverse.